Okay, welcome back. This is Scott Webb. I am with C2C Sports Investment Group, the handicapper here. And we're going to talk about the NFC Championship Game, this one between the visiting Minnesota Vikings and the Philadelphia Eagles. I think the best way to start with this is talk about the line. The line opened at 3.5. It's down to 3 for Minnesota. So there is some action going for the underdog Philadelphia Eagles at home. And the line is down to 39, I believe, as the over and the under right now, maybe 39.5. So as we're looking at this game, I think it's important to understand that these two coaches are going to try to offset their quarterbacks. Both of them are backup quarterbacks. Obviously, Case Keenum has played the majority of the year. Nick Foles is a quarterback that hasn't played as nearly as much. His confidence level is not as high as Case Keenum's just because he hasn't played as much. And also his play has not been as well. So when you look at these games and how they're going to break down, I think the first thing to understand is that the coaching of the play calling might be very conservative. Not that the Eagles head coach is in a position, Peterson, where his norm is to be conservative. He's normally, you got a guy that goes for it on fourth down. He's a guy that's unconventional with some of his play calling. But in this particular game, I think that they're going to try to protect field position. I think they're going to try to limit the damage that quarterbacks can do and have them be game managers as much as possible. So when you think about that, I think you're going to see a dink and dunk game for the most part, which makes sense, particularly on one side of the ball. Not so much on the other side of the ball, which we'll get to. So I think that's the big precedent in this game. As they're going forward, maybe the confidence level increase may dictate a different style as the game goes along. But I think most of this game is going to be played under the idea that we need to keep it close to the best. Now, having said all of those things, let's talk about some of this stuff because everybody wants to talk about how good the Eagles' defense is. Everybody wants to talk about how good Minnesota's defense is. The reality is that both defenses are extremely good. However, one of the defenses is much better than the other. And as we look at the offenses, we'll look at them from that same perspective, and we will make an analogy that one is better than the other there too. So one of the things that we look at here in this game is Pro Football Focus has the defensive line for the Philadelphia Eagles as a biggest edge in stopping the run of Minnesota against their offensive line of any of the playoff team game matchups remaining. So I think that's a significant issue for Minnesota in trying to move the ball, especially running the ball. If they can't run the ball, then they're going to be in a position where they're going to have to rely on Case Keenum not just to be a game manager, but they're going to have to rely on him to actually make some plays to win the game. And the truth of this is Nick Foles is going to have to make plays to win the game as well because, as you'll see, the defenses will dominate the game. So when you look at the defense in Philadelphia, they allowed the fewest rushing yards, and they were number 2 in what's called stuff rate, which is 0 or lost yards on rushing attempts. They were number 2 in the league. They are number 1 on first downs, and they are number 3 on third and long. So it's going to be really important for the Minnesota Vikings to come up with solutions on first down to try to get some yards and then get into a manageable situation on third and short. So second down is going to be just as critical as first down. The Philadelphia Eagles do a lot of things on their defense, but they really do it with the defensive line, much like Jacksonville does. They are number 8 in quarterback pressure rate from the defensive line. Um, so everything we've talked about to this point has been about how the Philadelphia Eagles defensive front is, and the defensive front is very good. However, the defensive secondary has got a lot to be desired here. I mean, yeah, they're a playoff team. Yeah, they're a great caliber football team. But if they have a weakness, it's in the secondary. They are, to mention, first of all, they are the third most allowing defense of yak yards. Yak yards are yards after the catch. So when a receiver catches the ball, whether it's a running back or a tight end or a wide receiver, they give up the most, well, the third most in the entire league. So I think that it's important for the Minnesota Vikings here to kind of figure out where they're going, because Philadelphia plays a lot of man-to-man coverage. They average 51 on man-to-man, and they're very good at man-to-man. So I think that you're going to find Minnesota in a spot where they're going to need to get their wide receivers in a better advantage situation, because both Thielen and Riggs is going to be one of these guys that can make that happen. And not only can they make it happen, but they're going to be in a position too that Diggs can make himself, and so can Thielen, the go-to part of the game. So the Philadelphia defense is great when it comes to run stuffing, front line, that kind of stuff, pressuring the quarterback. But they rank number 20 in all of football, which is obviously in the lower third, in red zone touchdowns allowed. So if you're going to be an elite defense, you can't rank 20th in the red zone on defense in scoring touchdowns. So there's a significant difference between what Minnesota's defense can do versus what Philadelphia can do. Philadelphia can stop certain things, but they can't stop everything. And Minnesota is going to be equipped to be able to stop some things that you might think or Minnesota's going to be able to exploit some things. So let's think about it from when they have the ball. Minnesota's offensive line has the third most plays with blown blocks in 2017. So that gives the Philadelphia Eagles a chance here to, again, get to the quarterback, maybe make a couple plays behind the line of scrimmage, and it's going to happen. This is going to be one of those games where the defense dominates. So don't expect a lot of real positive, 4 yards here, 4 yards there, 5 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards, 6 yards. They're going to need to get some plays in chunks, and the team that can move the ball in chunks on a series or two is a team that's going to win the game. So I think that the big difference is going to be that Case Keenum has some experience by playing all year, but he's also in a position where they're going to do halfway decent with him at what he's seen in pressure. So he's seen a lot of pressure. He made some mistakes last week, so he threw an interception. He took 2 sacks. One of the sacks was a really bad sack. The sack that he took was when they were on the 34-yard line. He got sacked for, I think it was 7 yards, knocked him back to the 41, moved him out of field goal range. And then his very next possession and his very next pass, he threw an interception, and that was when the game was 17-0 for Minnesota, which allowed the Saints right back in the game, because then it became 17-14. Had he not taken the sack, that might have been 20-0, and then we might not have even had to worry about them getting behind and all the other stuff that happened at the end of the game. So I expect this to be a low-scoring game, but I also expect the Minnesota Vikings to get the ball out quick. I expect them to have Thielen and Diggs be open because they have the edge against their defenders. They're going to be a team that is in a position that using play action pass will allow Case Keenum to be at his best. So if they can at all get anything on first down, or if they can get to a point where they're second and manageable or third and manageable, that play action pass is going to go a long way. They ran the play action pass second most of any team in the NFL, and Case Keenum's percentage and quarterback rating in those play action pass scenarios was much, much better than it is when he's in anything else. And actually, it's near 100%. So he's in a really good spot when it comes to those. Minnesota is ranked 24th on offense on third and long. So those are going to be scenarios you want to stay out of if you're Minnesota. But it's the same thing with if you're the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles are in that same spot. They're not a very strong third down team either. So let's kind of backtrack 1 second, because we need to look at how the offense works, right? So when Case Keenum is throwing versus a zone, he's a 70% completion percentage guy, and he's only a 58% percentage guy when he's thrown against man-to-man. So you're going to see Philadelphia do a lot of pressing. They're going to be on the guys a lot. And again, we talked about how good their defense was on man-to-man. So that would be one of their scenarios where they have the ability to stay with the receivers. But these two receivers grade out much better. The tight end is much better. The backside of the backfield catching give them all kinds of avenues for path for success that on the other side of the ball, which we'll talk about in a minute, you don't have. So Minnesota can maybe get a running game going. I don't know. It's going to be real hard for them. Latavius Murray has been doing very well in the last few games, but the passing game is how you beat the Eagles in this game, and they have the weapons to do it. It's just a matter of whether Case Keenum is available to be the Case Keenum that won all the games that he did this year for Minnesota. So we're going to look at it from a perspective that the Minnesota offense is better right now than the Philadelphia offense, and I don't think there's really much to say that they're not. The Eagles, with Foles leading the way, is a much, much different offense than they were when they had Wentz leading the way. In fact, as they go through it, Foles, he hasn't fared well under pressure. They have a tackle in the game that is replacing Peters, who was hurt earlier in the year. So he's been playing. It's not like it just happened. But Vaitai is going to get to a point where there is a very significant concern that Griffin, the tight end or the defensive end for Minnesota, can exploit that weakness and get to the quarterback relatively easy. Since week 14, the trending offense for the Philadelphia Eagles is that they rank 31st in rushing success and 30th in the league in passing success. So that's critical to understand, because if they're one of the worst teams on offense and they're going to play really the best defense, it's going to be a very hard deal for them to try to score. Their defense in the trend for the last, since week 14, so over and that includes the playoffs, so the last 4 or 5 games, they rank 14th in pass success. They're 20th against the run. They're 19th against explosive passing, and they're 27th in explosive runs. So even though we talked about how good the defensive line is, the linebackers and the defensive backs don't tackle well. We've talked about that. They allow the red zone scoring. We've talked about that. but now you're seeing a fall off in performance as well. And that could be because they're on the field a little bit more because they don't hold the ball on offense as much. So I think that when you flip the page over and you start looking at where the success rate comes in for Minnesota and Minnesota on defense, here's a couple things to understand. Number one, Minnesota really doesn't have any glaring holes on their defense. So they're top 5 in pass defense, they're top 5 in run defense, they're top 10 versus the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers, versus the running backs, versus the tight ends. They tackle well. They are second in short passes defensed. They allow the fewest yards after contact of any team in the NFL. They're third on 3 and outs. The offenses punted 49% of their drives, and they're third in red zone scoring. Okay, so we just talked about Philadelphia's defense and spent quite a bit of time on it. I just rattled off a whole bunch of numbers in regards to the Minnesota defense. But think about what we just said. We just said that right now, trending, the offense for the Philadelphia Eagles is 31st in rushing success, 30th in passing success. They are going to face a top 5 passing defense, a top 5 rushing defense. So where do you think that leaves them to go on offense? Well, I don't think it really leaves them to go anywhere. The defensive backs for Minnesota are much, much better than the defensive backs for Philadelphia. They are top 10 against the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers and running backs and tight ends. So they cover everybody. There's not somebody that's going to be there. And we talked about how Philadelphia misses tackles, gives up points in the red zone. The Minnesota defense does not do that. The only thing that you can really slight the Minnesota defense for, if anything at all, is that's how they play defense. They keep the ball in front of them. They tackle the guy. They force you to kick. They're not getting a ton of turnovers, whereas the Philadelphia defense does get some turnovers. So that might be a key snag in this game. But I don't see it that way because I think that the offensive coordinators, I think the head coaches limit the exposure these quarterbacks are going to have to turnovers. So I think that plays right into Minnesota's hands here. I think Minnesota is showing that they're going to have the better offense. And even though the Philadelphia defense is very, very good, there isn't any better defense right now than the Minnesota Viking defense. So at every category, offense and defense, and then look at the coaches. The coaches, you got Mike Zimmer, who's been there. He's done this. He's taken this team to double-digit wins over the last few years. He's gotten them into the playoffs over the last few years. He's an excellent football coach. Doug Peterson, he is not necessarily an excellent football coach. So he can get out-schemed, he can get out-coached, he can get out-maneuvered. So not only do you have a better offense, you have a better defense, you have a better head coach. So what more can you ask for in a game like this where everything's on the line and you sort of feel lucky that you won the last game because in reality you shouldn't have? So I don't think these are going to be one of these positions where you're going to have one of those dome teams that come into a cold weather stadium and perform poorly, because this game's not going to be a cold weather, snowy, blistery type game. So as you go along down the line and you see what happens here, this is going to be a low-scoring game. Kickers are going to be at a premium. You're going to run into the defense's ability to play well throughout the game, and that's where you fall and you say that at some point in time there's going to be a touchdown, maybe 2 touchdowns allowed by the Philadelphia defense that aren't going to be allowed by the Minnesota defense, and I think that's how the game plays out. So in this particular game, I don't have a ton of plays. I'm not going to play it a crazy way. I do like the under. I know the under's under 40, but this has time management, running the ball. Even when you get to, it might even be a game like this where you get down into your opponent's field position. Say you're on the 16-yard line and it's 3rd down and 7 from the 16. What do you want to bet that they don't actually go for a 16-yard touchdown? What do you want to bet that they try to maybe run a draw play, run a screen pass, run something so that they don't lose yardage, so that the field goal is good and they can save the field goal? So I think that you're going to see lower scoring in the game. So I don't mind the 40 as a number. It's really 39, so 39 and a half, whatever your number is. We're going to go under in that game, and we're also going to play the better team. We're going to play the Minnesota Vikings on the road to win by more than 3 points. 3 points is a big number, but if you put them on a neutral field, I think that if that was truly the case, then it would be 6 points. And I do think that their offense could show a lot better on turf than they do on the natural grass there in Philadelphia. So as we go along, here recapping the plays of this game, it's going to be under the 39.5, and it's going to be the Minnesota Vikings minus the 3.5, and we're going to do both of those at 1 unit. All right, guys, thanks a lot. Talk to you later.